When you're using Logic Pro, there are a few things that you need to be aware of, namely the outside world, really, what happens with the audio interfaces, speakers, that sort of thing. So when you're recording, everything is going to go your way. Now, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about setting levels and things like audio interfaces and whether you're software monitoring, direct monitoring, whatever it is you're doing. Let's have a look. On the main page within Logic then, you can see at the moment I've got my initial screen where it asks me what tracks I want, whether it be a software instrument, an audio, or the drummer, or guitar or bass and that sort of thing. So I'm going to choose audio because I've got a microphone connected to input 2 of my 2-channel audio interface. I've got the Apollo Twin by Universal Audio, but really this applies to any audio interface out there. So I'm going to select input 2, number of tracks 1. And there we go. Now, I've got another microphone here. You're listening to a narration mic with a separate recorder, but I've got this AKG C414, very nice microphone, 1, 2, 1, 2, and I'm speaking into it. And as you can see, there is a level coming into Logic. Now, it's reasonably loud. I'm using pretty much all of the level of this microphone using the level capabilities of Logic. So what I need to do is to turn down the input slightly on the audio interface so that I get a level that's a bit more like so. You can see that it's kind of dancing up and down, but it's not going too far into the red, as it were. Now, different to analog recording, you can't go into the red with digital because it just sounds awful, and you can't do anything about an over-recorded sound. So if I press record, 1, 2, here we go, that's about right, that's okay. If I now set this to record, now there's a little I button here. What that does is it actually allows you to listen to the microphone, but via Logic. You might want to do this, but you might not. Now, we've got this thing called latency, which is the time taken for audio to actually go through all the processing of the computer to come back to your speakers. It's not always going to be a helping hand. So if I just put the input device on here, input monitoring, 1, 2, you can hear that there's a little bit of a delay between the input and the output of the computer. This depends entirely on the capabilities of your computer and some settings that you make within the audio interface itself and Logic's audio. So if I go, for example, preferences, audio, I can see that I've got an input-output buffer size of 256 samples. Now, ideally, this should be as low as possible without putting too much capability onto the computer or put too much strain onto the computer audio interface. You can see that we've got 32 samples. Now, that indeed might be very low. If I try it, 32 samples, and I'm going to apply that, what it does is it reinitializes the audio and then gives you an even shorter latency. It says 1.2 milliseconds or round trip 24 milliseconds. Here we go. So I'm going to just close that page and I'm going to try recording again. 1, 2, 2. The delay is even less, but it's still there. Now, if you're using effects or if you're playing guitar and you're going through a guitar amp, this might put you off. However, all is not lost because actually the sound is okay. It's not sort of clicking or anything like that. So if I try pressing record now, switch that click off using K on the keyboard. It's a very good idea to get used to your key commands. 1, 2, 1, 2. So as you can see, Logic is drawing a level on the screen there. It's drawing an oscilloscope trace of what I'm saying. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2. Nothing's too loud, and actually it's not too quiet either. It's about right. So I'm going to press stop on there. And I'm going to go back and have a listen. Good idea to get used to your key commands. 1, 2, 1, 2. So as you can see, Logic is drawing a level on the screen there. No problems at all with any of that. It's drawing an oscilloscope trace of what I'm saying. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2. Now, a little bit of an aside about mics. You can hear a sort of slight bass end, that sort of popping there. Ideally, you'd use something like this, a pop shield that goes in front of your microphone like so. A very cheap thing, but actually worth their weight in gold because they really do stop all those sort of wind noises getting through. So I've now got a recording I've set my input, which is input 2 on the audio interface, and it's going out of my stereo output. So I have myself a recording that is reasonably successful. Now, what happens if I try adding a software instrument? Now, I've got a keyboard here. Will that latency of, well, the buffer size of 32 be enough for me to, or be high enough for me to actually realize an electric piano, for example? Now, I've got other things like I've got the complete, I've got the contact sounds, but I'm just using Logic's input, own sounds here. That's fine, nothing wrong with that at all. So I'll just try recording a bit of that. I'm just going to mute the microphone that I've just used to record, and I'm going to switch it off as well, switch the record off, because if I record the keyboard, I'm going to go over the recording. It doesn't destroy the recording, don't worry about that, but it's a bit of a nuisance because you're recording more audio unnecessarily. This time, I've recorded a MIDI track. I've USB'd the keyboard straight into the computer, and the sounds are playing back through my audio interface. So as you can see, instead of it being a blue audio track, I've got a green MIDI track. You can change the colours of audio tracks and MIDI tracks if you like, but these are the default ones. I've never bothered changing them, and that's what I'm used to. So what I got here is essentially digital information. So this is different to audio, which is very memory intensive. This particular track that I've just played is a few tens of kilobytes only in terms of information, so it's really efficient. All of the sounds are coming from the computer, which these little bits of data then address. Now these are the main two things that you would record. You would record a MIDI track and an audio track. Now it's a bit different if I've got a guitar where I have to plug straight into the front of the audio interface. Just now I was talking about the latency being an issue, and yeah, it can be. Now the audio interface that I've got, and indeed your own audio interface, may indeed have its own capabilities in terms of being able to monitor directly. Now this is really what you want. If you're recording a guitar or something, you want to be able to hear exactly what you're doing at the exact time that you're playing things. Now depending on the capability of the computer, you may want to actually mute your input. So I'm going to set up a guitar now. Here I am with my electric guitar. I know it's a semi-acoustic, but I've plugged it in so that you're listening to the pickup rather than the body of the guitar. Now, I've got to set a track here. I've got to add a new track, so I'll go to my plus symbol, guitar or bass. This is what I'm going to go for. So input 1 is where I've plugged my guitar into on the audio interface. Now, some audio interfaces, or indeed most, when they've got a jack input, there should be either a button marked high Z, or it might have a picture of a guitar next to it. You've got to make sure that that's plugged in, because the pickup needs to actually not be have power soaked from it, which would be the case with a line input. You need to make sure that the impedance of the guitar pickup matches that of your preamp. So I'm going to create a new track there. And there's my output of my electric guitar. Now, what Logic has done is essentially given you an audio track, but it's giving you a load of guitar amps down the side here. Now, depending on what you've got, I've got some other guitar processors, but I'm just using Logic's own stock plugins because actually they're perfectly good, and actually it's, for the purposes of this demonstration, it just makes sense to use that rather than to draw in a third-party interface, which indeed you might not have. So I've got, at the moment, Brit and Clean. It's a Vox AC30. Now what I can do is, I'm at the moment listening to this coming straight through the computer. There's a little bit of latency there, but that 32 setting that I had in the audio interface doesn't seem to be creating any problems. Now, of course, this may have an effect if you're playing to drums on Logic and you're playing along. If there's enough of a delay, when you play back, it's not going to sound any good at all. So if I, for example, I'm going to just get a drum rhythm from the Apple loops. So I'm just going to find, there we go, drums. So all drums, I'm going to get... Oh, I'm just going to bring that into here. There we go. So I've now got Anders with 11th hour, that drum rhythm there. I'm going to go back into my preferences here. In fact, I'll record something with the 32 so you can hear that it does work. Okay, so if I play that back, I didn't really mean to have that electric piano in, but it was quite atmospheric, and I thought, well, that's all right. I'm just going to get rid of it, though. I'm going to mute it. So I'm going to listen to the guitar and the drums together. That's fine. Now, if I try to record... I'm going to create exactly the same track. That's what this little button up here is for. New track with duplicate settings. I'm going to record some more guitar, but I'm going to go back into the audio preferences, and this time I'm going to set a much bigger input-output buffer size. I'm going to go right the other end. There's going to be quite a significant delay when I play the guitar. That's going to put me off. So that's not going to sound terribly nice when I play it back. You can hear that I'm fighting with those drums. I'm fighting with the guitar sound, the drums. I'm just basically fighting. Now, this is the trouble. I've got the audio interface that I've got here. I'm able to actually, if I just open this up, I can actually listen to the input directly. So if I switch off Logic's input, I can actually hear the... Now this is an advantage, and most audio interfaces will allow a direct level input, a direct monitoring. This is where the latency thing becomes an issue. Now the only trouble is, of course, you can't really use Logic's guitar preamps now, because they will be subject to that delay. Luckily with the universal audio stuff, you do have guitar preamps and guitar things that you can use. You could even use a pod. Maybe you could use the pod for monitoring and then plug another input from your DI box straight into your audio interface. So you're still recording a dry signal, but you're able to hear the guitar as you may want it. Of course, the pod settings may be different to your Logic settings. But there it is. There's a little bit of how to get started making recordings and setting levels, dealing with latency, dealing with all sorts of problems that may arise.